DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there even when the success you expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unifying philosophy that is called work on your game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is bosses versus leaders. And yes, there's a difference between the two. I'll get into explaining what that difference is and why it matters when we get into this material. First, let me give you two announcements. First of all, my daily motivation, Monday motivation message is guaranteed to have you focused, sharp, and on point to start your week. You want these coming straight to your phone. All you got to do is be a member of my text community. It's free to join. Text me at the number 305-384-6894. It's listed down below in the description. When we start sending those messages out again, you'll be getting those straight to your phone. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. If you would like to have me as your direct coach, if you would like to build a bulletproof mindset, you want to have a clear strategy for what you're doing in your life and your business, you want systems so that you can operate and execute on a consistent basis, and you want to make sure you're being held accountable for full and consistent implementation, go to workonyourgameuniversity.com and we will help you with that immediately. All that out the way, let's get into the topic again here today, which is bosses versus leaders. Now, this is a topic that, these are concepts that are often conflated by people because they don't understand that there is a real difference between these two things. I'm going to help you understand, I'm going to articulate that difference. I'm going to help you understand the difference. I'm going to help you understand why that difference matters. And then you can make your own decisions as to which one you consider yourself to be if you plan on being either one. I'm assuming many of you at least want to be one of these. And as I explained, you'll probably be clear on which one that is. So sometimes a person can be both of these. Let me be clear. You can be both a boss and a leader. And in my points, you're going to understand that those are two different roles. They're not the same role at the same time. And I don't need to give too much background on this because everything else I can say is going to be contained in our points. So let's get to the points. Point number one. Topic, once again, is bosses versus leaders. Let's talk about bosses first. Number one, bosses are people who make people do things, while we'll also talk about leaders. Leaders inspire people to do things. Bosses make people take action, whereas leaders inspire people to take action. Now, is that a semantics play that I'm doing right there with you? Yes, it is semantics, but those semantics matter. All right, semantics doesn't just mean that it doesn't matter that there's a word difference. Semantics means, when I say semantics, yes, it's a word difference, and that word difference matters. All right, that's why I'm pointing it out to you. So a boss is a person who can just tell someone you have to do something and people will comply because they maybe don't have a choice. At least they don't believe they have a choice. Whereas a leader inspires a person to act, meaning a leader is putting the energy to want to do something in you. They are not forcing it upon you. And you often hear people talking about being a boss in a bragging type of way. Like people talk about this when maybe post on themselves. They'll say, hey, I'm a boss, or boss guy, or boss girl, or boss woman, or boss bitch. You hear people say that. Or, and if you listen to rap music, rappers often talk about being bosses, brag about being bosses. Bosses are able to, again, demand action of people who, based on the situation, may not have a choice but to follow what the boss says or exit the premises. It's pretty much the only choices you have. And when I worked at Pizza Hut, for example, if the manager, who was my boss, told me to fold up some pizza boxes and I didn't want to do it, then the only option I had was to give up my job because I would have got fired on the spot for not listening to the demand of the boss. I didn't have any other option. That's what it's like when you're working with a boss. They can follow orders, they make demands, and those orders are followed because there is a penalty for not listening to what the boss says, usually if we're talking at work, that means dismissal from your position, from your job. Most people don't want to lose their job over non-compliance, so they simply comply with what the boss says, whether you like the boss or not. So it makes sense when people brag about being bosses, if they are actually bosses, because a person who calls himself a boss, they are communicating that they have the power to make someone else do something. Even if that person doesn't want to do it, they still do it because the boss has the power to compel action out of that person. They're compelling compliance out of that individual. So someone who has that power, some of you listening to this, you have that power. You have people who work for you. They're on your payroll. They are beneath you on the org chart. Therefore, if you tell them to do something, they pretty much have to follow what you say, or they will face a penalty that they probably don't want to face. Therefore, they will do what you say. Right? That's what it means to be a boss. It's not necessarily a negative thing. All right? Again, some of you know exactly what this is. Some of you have those boss powers in your position or your career right now. Even at home, you can be a boss. If you're a parent and you have kids who are underage, they're not full adults and they aren't paying any bills and they're living under a roof that you are responsible for, you have boss privileges with those children, meaning you can tell them what to do and they pretty much have to comply. And if they don't comply, then you have the power to put some penalties on their heads for not doing what you tell them to do. That is a form of being a boss. You are communicating, you can tell them what to do, and if they don't listen, then it's just what it is. So any of you who is a parent, or even those of you who remember being with your parents, I know this happened back in the era when I was a child, that if your parent told you to do something and you dared to question it, that household I grew up in, questioning what your parents told you to do was a risk you were taking. The response normally was some form of, because I said so. All right, I told you to do it, do it. That's it. There is no negotiation. There's no debate, and there's no negotiation between an adult and a child. That was either what was directly or indirectly communicated to you as a child back in our era. I don't know what parents are doing these days with kids who are old enough to do that. I have a child. My child's not old enough to really have dialogue with me, but I'm thinking right now, what would I say if I told my kid to do something? He said, why? I would probably say the same thing my parents told me, because I said so. And not because I'm just mimicking what my parents did. That's part of it. But it's also because I'm the boss. I'm in charge. And you're going to do what I say. And you're going to learn to respect the authority of the position of the people who have it over you, so that when you're in a position of authority, you respect what it felt like to not be in authority. And who knows? Maybe I'll change on that. My child is approaching 2 years of age as of this recording. So maybe I'll change on it by the time he's old enough to go back and forth with me. But I doubt it. I think it's gonna rhyme with because I said so, even if I don't say it in so many words. Now, let's pivot to what a leader is. We're still on point number 1 here. And today our topic is bosses versus leaders. A leader, on the other hand, is working in the position of service. A boss is in the position of, let's just call it, they can command compliance. They aren't complying, but they're forcing compliance. Whereas a leader is a person who is working from a position of service. They are there to give rather than to demand. That's what a leader is doing. Even if a leader does not have a title that communicates superiority, they actually have it still. They have some superiority, not in a boss type of way, but they have superiority in that they can get other people to do things, but they're not even looking at themselves that way. A leader doesn't look at themselves as they're above anybody, because again, a leader is acting from an energy of service. A leader is a person who inspires other people to follow. Again, that's why they're a leader, because you're not a leader if nobody's following you. At least you can lead yourself, but you got to be following yourself. You're going to be a leader as well. We'll talk about that in a moment. And leaders do things by example, even if they offer very little verbally. So you can be a leader within an organization without doing too much talking. Most bosses have to talk because that's the only way they can communicate to their subordinates what they want done, because that's how the bosses get the point across. Hey, I need you to do that. I need you to clean that up. I need you to take out that trash. I need you to clean out the garage. I need you to answer that phone. That's what a boss does. A boss tells you what they want you to do. That's the only way they can communicate what they want. Whereas a leader, on the other hand, can communicate what others will be compelled to do based on their own actions. So a leader will go and do a thing, and then everybody else will go do the thing. Even if the leader doesn't say anything, other people will follow it just because they saw the leader doing it. All right, that's an example of what they call leading by example without even talking. So people get behind a leader because they want to, not because they have to. This is the key difference between a boss and a leader. People follow what a boss says because they have to. People do what a leader does because they want to. And the key difference between the two. Bosses get their point across by telling you. Leaders get their point across by showing you. Doesn't mean a leader doesn't talk. It doesn't mean a boss doesn't work. But the main way they communicate their points is a boss tells you what to do, whereas a leader shows you what to do. Again, this is a general point. There are times when leaders talk and there are times when bosses do things. But the general point is I want you to understand the spirit of the difference between these two positions. People get behind a leader, again, because they choose to. They don't have to. You don't have to get behind a leader if you don't want to, but people want to because you see them as a leader. You see someone as a leader, you will follow what they're doing if you see them as a leader. If any of you wants to go through the hardest test of leadership, by the way, any of you who is a leader or you're a boss or you think you're a leader, but you're not quite sure, you're listening and trying to figure it out, go lead a group of people who have no obligation to listen to anything that you say. That's how you'll find out if you're a leader or not. You'll find out very quickly. You want to find out if you're a true leader, Go lead a group of people who have no obligation to listen to you. They don't have to listen to you. They don't have to comply with your requests. They don't have to follow anything that you do. They can just straight up ignore you if they want to. If you can get those people to follow you, then you're a leader. That's the number one test of leadership. You can't prove that you're a leader when you have the title of manager and everybody else is an employee and they technically are under your authority. That doesn't really prove that you're a leader because you don't know if those people would follow you if they had an option. So they don't have an option, so they're listening to you. So that makes you a boss. Again, it doesn't mean a boss is a bad thing, but a leader is when people can do whatever they want and they choose to follow you. They have 100% autonomy and they choose to follow you anyway. That's a leader. So some examples of this, these are places where you have, let's say, a volunteer organization where there's no money being paid to the people who are following you. There's no money being paid to you for your position. And you have no leverage over people because you can't fire them because they don't work there. So you have no leverage. So any type of volunteer organization, any of you who's done any type of community work, civil organizations, church groups, for example, some form of nonprofit, charity, weekend gathering groups, anything people do outside of their 9-to-5 jobs. Many of you who are heavily involved in your local communities, you know the type of places that we're talking about. A Toastmasters organization. I was a president of Toastmasters in Miami Beach in 2015 going into 2016 for a year. And it was a great test of my leadership ability because Toastmasters is a volunteer organization, meaning I was not paid to be the president and no one was paid to show up to the meetings or listen to what I had to say or to follow my lead. And my ability to lead that group was much more of a challenge than my ability to lead, let's say, staff who works for me on my payroll today because I'm paying them. So they're pretty much going to comply with whatever I ask them to do, even if I make a ridiculous request because they want to get their paycheck. But when you're leading people who don't get a paycheck from you, well, they don't have to listen to you if they don't want to. So that's how you find out you're really a leader. Okay. So try one of these places. Any of you who's ever done something like this or been in one of these groups, think back to your experience there. That's where you can find out who was leading that group. Why were people following that person? Because again, that person couldn't really do anything to anybody. So when people can choose not to listen to you or not show up, if you can lead there, that's a true example of your leadership ability. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is bosses versus leaders. Number 2, a boss can climb a ladder to acquire their position. Actually, that's how most bosses acquire their position. They climb some type of ladder or they buy their way in. So for example, if someone owns a business and they have 10 employees and then they sell the business to someone else, and now those 10 employees still work there, but they have a whole different boss. The boss didn't climb the ladder of the company. He just bought his way in by buying the company. That's one way you can do it. You can get hired in as, let's say, the new CEO to replace the old CEO. So you can get hired in, you can buy your way in, and you can work your way up the ladder to get there. But there's some type of ascension that has to happen in order for you to become a boss, whether you make a one-step ascension, like jumping all the way to the top, or you work your way up from the bottom. But a leader, on the other hand, can lead from any position, even without a title. You see, a leader doesn't have to be at the top of the ladder in order to lead. A boss has to be at the top of the ladder to be a boss. They have to be at the top of the ladder relative to the people who they're a boss of. So for example, if you're working in a corporation, big corporation, and there's someone who's in middle management and your department is below middle management, the middle managers are bosses to you. Even though they're not at the top of the ladder, they're at the top of your ladder. So they're above you. That makes them your boss. Whereas a leader can be a leader even if they don't have a title at all. They could be somewhere in the middle of the mix. They can still be a leader because people are following their initiative. That's what makes you a leader. Sometimes a leader in an organization is a person who does not have a title at all. And again, any of you who's had a lot of experiences being in different groups with adults and even children, you notice this as well, that a leader doesn't necessarily have to be the person with the title. It's just the person everybody follows. But you'll know that they're a leader. The reason you'll know they're a leader even without the title is because you'll see everyone deferring to, listening to, and looking towards them when there's a decision that needs to be made. That's how you know who a leader is. You know who the leader is in any group, that when there's a question to be answered, everybody looks to see what that person says first. Before anybody else says anything, everybody looks at that person. That's how you know who the leader is. So next time you're in a room and you want to know who the leader is, you don't even have to know anybody's title. Just find out when there's a question to be answered or a challenge to be addressed, who is everyone looking to, expecting to speak first before they speak? That's the leader. That whoever that is, that's the leader. Again, sometimes they don't have the title, but again, just look at people's eyes. They're looking at that person. And when that person speaks, everybody stops talking and listens to what they have to say. And they consider it. Even if they disagree with it, they will deeply consider what the leader says. That's how you know who a leader is. So leaders, again, you can find these by naturally by simply paying attention to what's happening. Just observe what's happening amongst the group. You know who the leader is. Now, again, you can notice this very easily. Let's say, for example, on a sports team, you can know who the leader is because sometimes on a sports team, there is a captain or there may be multiple captains on the team. That is similar to having a boss position because it's a title that is given to you. But the leader is the person who everybody is listening to, whether they are a captain or not. Usually, though, in the sports world, being that sports is the closest thing to a meritocracy we have in society, usually, though, a person on a sports team who everybody is listening to, usually they end up being the captain. Why? Because the players can see, all right, this is the person we're listening to. They might as well be a captain. And the coaches can see that this is the person that everybody's listening to. They might as well be a captain. Usually in the sports world, it's pretty clear. The captains are usually the ones that people listen to. That's how they became captains. See, they didn't just get handed the title without earning it. And that's the beautiful thing about sports being a meritocracy is that you have to earn a lot of what you get in the sports world on the playing side. The playing side of sports is the closest thing you will get to seeing the highest performers getting the best rewards and the worst performers getting the worst rewards and mediocre people getting mediocre rewards. Is usually it works out the way it's supposed to in sports. It doesn't happen that way in any other aspect of life. Definitely not in corporate, definitely not in academia, and definitely not in the government or anywhere else you want to name. Only in sports does it work out this way. So those of you who don't have experience playing team sports, I'm sorry that you were deprived, but you can live vicariously through me when I share you these examples. So sometimes the captain of let's say, for example, on a sports team, sometimes this can happen. It doesn't happen that often, but sometimes the captain does not get heard and not followed because the title was just handed to them and it was not earned. Actually, let me give you an example. I can think of a really good example of this because I'll give it to you in a second, but in many places that I worked outside of being an entrepreneur, which I am now, and outside of playing basketball, which you know about, the bosses were the people who simply had been working at the job longer than everyone else. That's pretty much how you became a boss. I worked at Pizza Hut. I brought that up earlier. The managers at Pizza Hut were usually, I believe, I'm trying to think when I was working at Pizza, it was 3 managers there. And 3 black guys were 3 different managers. One head manager, his name was Brett, and there were 2 assistant managers. One was named, I can't remember their names. But anyway, the head manager had been working at Pizza Hut longer than everybody else at the store. And then the 2 assistant managers had been working there pretty much longer than everybody else. And there was one guy who was a cook. I remember this guy. He was a cook, and I'm not sure where he was from. I think he was Caribbean, somewhere from the Caribbean. And he seemed like he had been working at Pizza Hut a long time. He was like the head cook. He pretty much ran the cooking area. He technically wasn't a manager, but amongst the cooks, he kind of had authority with them. So he was like a de facto manager amongst the cooks. He didn't have anything to do with the people at the front, which is where I worked. But I could tell by the way he carried himself. He had been around a long time, and everybody pretty much listened to him. But in those environments, those kind of places, a lot of bureaucracies, it works that way, that you basically move up just by being there longer than everybody else. In the business world, they call that seniority. In sports, we call it that as well. But I'll give you an example. I remember in college, this is I believe my 3rd year, my junior year of college, a new coach had come in to replace the coach who had recruited me. So this new coach comes in. I was on the team for a little while. I didn't stay on the team. And there was a guy on the team named Mark. Now, Mark was on the roster, but for whatever reason, he was not eligible to play yet. So he would participate in practice some, but he didn't play in the game. So he participate sometimes in practice. He didn't do all the practice stuff because he wouldn't be available in the game. So he kind of dabbled in practice. And I remember our coach, this guy named Armin Gilliam. Armin, for some reason, was enamored with this guy, Mark, at least that part of the season. He just wanted Mark to be one of the captains of the team. He was looking at this guy as a leader. I want you to be a leader. I remember once I heard him saying this to Mark, and it was not in front of the whole team, but we were coming out of the locker room, and I saw him talking to Mark, and he was like, yeah, I want you to give a talk to the team about leadership. And if any of my teammates who played with me at Penn State, Altoona, know this guy, Mark, who I'm referring to, and hearing that our coach wanted Mark to give a speech about leadership, that's just absolutely ridiculous and hilarious at the same time. But anyway, the coach was trying to make Mark into a captain of the team, even though, well, first of all, Mark wasn't playing yet. And secondly, what the coach didn't understand, because the coach was very, his perceptive abilities were very weak. He's not a very perceptive person. He was not a good people person, our coach. He was good at teaching basketball. He was not a good coach of basketball. He was a good teacher. He should have been a trainer instead of a coach. But he didn't even notice that the players on the team, we did not respect Mark. We didn't respect him. We thought he was kind of an anomaly. There were many things we didn't know about this guy. He had a reputation for lying, and he just wasn't the guy that we would look at as a captain. He's not a guy we were going to listen to him talk. And Mark knew this, and the players knew it, but the coach didn't know it because the coach just wasn't doing a good job of paying attention. But anyway, this is one example, and I'm giving you this to let you know that sometimes there are exceptions to the rule. In sports, our coach was trying to make this guy into a captain, but it would never have worked with him as a captain because nobody really respected this guy. And I don't think he actually lasted as a captain anyway. Once it became obvious to the coach, at some point, some things are just so obvious that you can't even ignore them, that he never ended up being a captain. So sometimes in sports, if you try to force someone to be a captain or a boss when they're really not, it'll be so obvious so quickly that they'll get dumped out of that position very fast. Again, this is why sports is the ultimate meritocracy, because if you ain't got it, it'll be obvious real quick. So in many places, again, outside of sports, it's just longevity, seniority. Most of the time, these people who were bosses in places I worked outside of sports, so when I worked at LA Fitness or when I worked at Philadelphia Sports Club or at Pizza Hut, places like this, Rita's Water Ice, these kind of places, the bosses were people, again, they had been there longer, which usually meant they had some level of competence. That's the reason why they were able to keep their job for so long. But it didn't necessarily mean that they were leaders. They just had been, just because you work somewhere for a long time doesn't make you a leader. It just means you've been there. Most of them were not leaders. Again, they just had been there longer, which is how they got the position. And because I was subordinate to these people, I had no choice but to listen to their directives. They were not leaders, they were just bosses. But I would never have listened to them if the paycheck was not tied to listening to them. So I listened to them out of compliance and because I wanted the paycheck, not because I had so much respect for them as an individual person. That is the definition of someone being a boss. Someone is only listening to you because of the check, you're just a boss. Yes, I said just a boss. Nothing wrong with being a boss. But if you are a boss and a leader at the same time, that's a better situation. Now, you may find yourself being a leader without being a boss. Again, I told you, this happens all the time. Now, that's fine if you can be a leader without being a boss. Even though you may want to get your pay rate bumped up to something that looks like what a boss gets. At the same time, though, you don't want to be a boss and not be a leader, because now you just have a bunch of mercenaries on your team who are only following you for as long as they have to. And as soon as they don't have to comply, then it's over, because they don't really respect you as a person. What they respect is your power. That's not the same as respecting you. Moving on to point number 3. Today's topic is bosses versus leaders. Number 3, a boss may be complied with but not respected, as I just explained. If you're a boss and people don't see you as a leader, they will comply with what you say, but they don't really respect you as a person. Leaders, on the other hand, you must be respected to have any effect. Only way you can become a leader is to have the respect of the group. And again, I just talked about this in the previous point. As I said, when our coach tried to make this guy Mark into a captain when he did not have the respect of the group, it failed because he didn't have the respect of the group. It wouldn't have lasted. His title was paper thin, and it became obvious even to the coach that this guy was not leadership material because nobody respected him. And that was it. So a leader has to be respected, especially if you don't have a boss level position, because that's the only way you can become a leader. It's the only way anybody will ever listen to you, let alone follow what you do or what you say as a leader. Now, a boss, again, can force compliance. With zero, nobody has respect to you at all, but you can still force people to comply with you, which means the boss is in a precarious position. Because again, as soon as people no longer need to listen to you, they won't listen to you. It's over. You'll see this often in entry-level jobs, such as retail and fast food. I worked a good number of these jobs as a youth. When I say youth, I mean like early teens, not early teens, but mid to late teens, early 20s. I worked a good number of these jobs, entry-level type of jobs. As soon as the employees stopped getting paid, well, I would never talk to those bosses that I had ever again because I didn't have any connection to them as people. Only reason I listened to them is because listening to them is how I got my paycheck. That's the only reason I talked to them ever. And since there was no connection between me and the person in charge, the boss, now they had to go find another person and replace me and replace the next person and replace the next person. There's a high level of churn that comes with that. This is not necessarily a bad thing if you can figure out how to make it work as a business, and many companies do this. The local grocery store, the CVS, Walgreens, they deal with this stuff all the time. That they have all this churn because you have these entry-level people who may leave the job very quickly. There's no real connection between them and the person in charge for the most part. You may have some exceptional leaders working in these type of roles, but when the people in those roles happen, if you happen to be an exceptional leader working in a role like that, hopefully you realize it pretty quickly and realize, what the hell am I wasting my talent here for? Let me go somewhere where this actually gets rewarded. Not there. So a leader, on the other hand, can leave a job, go to a different company, and some of the staff will leave the job and go to the new company with the leader. They'll go work at the new place because the leader's there. All right, that's leadership, when people will follow you where you go, regardless of what it is that you're doing. So a simple rule of thumb, folks: leaders are followed, bosses are obeyed. And one of the things that for all of us as individuals, of course, you need to be able to lead yourself. I mean, you need to be able to set an example for yourself, tell yourself what you're going to do and actually do it. Do things that you are proud to know in your own mind that you were supposed to do and that you actually did. If you had a video camera just watching your moves for 24 hours a day, would you be proud of watching back that video of yourself over the last day and proud of the actions that you took and the things that you stayed away from? Would you be proud of it as a person leading yourself? And this is something that, for me, as I transitioned from, I've been posting content online for almost 2 decades. And the first 10 years that I was posting online, a lot of my material was basketball related, and thus I built a big audience of basketball players and basketball enthusiasts. In the last 10 years, it's been more focused on the business side of things, which includes mindset, which is the kind of like the bridge between the sports and the business world, because they both need mindset. Then into the strategy, systems, accountability, implementation, things like that, and all the stuff we talk about here business-wise. And I can proudly say that a good amount of my audience of basketball players who found me in the first half of my existence online stayed with and still connect with the stuff that I'm doing in the second half, at least, or hopefully we got more than 2 halves. Hopefully this keeps going. But the next 10 years of my existence online, as I transitioned into talking about other things, as they transitioned out of playing basketball as well, they continue to follow me as I continue to evolve and grow into talking about different things, to where these days, most of the time, I'm not talking about basketball at all, but these people who found me through basketball are still following me, even though I don't talk about it anymore. That is a form of, and I say this humbly but proudly, of leadership. All right, I transitioned my topic, but people stayed around. Not everybody stayed around, because some people still wanted the basketball, but a good number of people did stay around. That's a form of leadership as well. You evolve and you change, but people will stay with you, even though the thing that they came in for, you're not even doing that anymore, but they're still with you because they like the direction that you're moving. You see this in a lot of big businesses as well. With that out the way, folks, let's recap today's class, which is bosses versus leaders. Again, some people conflate these two concepts. They are not the same. Number one, bosses make people do things, while leaders inspire people to act. So when someone calls himself a boss, that means they can make someone do something, even if they don't feel like doing it, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But a leader is a person who gets someone to want to do something through inspiring them through energy, different approach. Number two, boss can climb a ladder to acquire a position. You can work somewhere for a long time. You can buy your way in. You can get hired in. Whereas a leader can be in a leadership position from anywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. You don't have to be at the top of any ladder in order to be a leader. It's just a matter of the influence you have amongst the group. Number three, a boss may be complied with but not respected. And leaders have to be respected to have any effect. So you can be a boss and nobody respects you at all, but they still do what you said. But a leader, if you don't have respect, then it's impossible for you to be a leader. So leadership and respect go hand in hand. They come as a package deal. If you are a leader, you must be respected. And if you are respected, you are eligible to be a leader. But you don't have to be respected at all to be a boss, depending on your position and how you got it. With all that said, folks, make sure you text me so you're in my community. My number is down below in the description. Also, Work on Your Game University. You'd like to work with me and have me help you install what we call the bulletproof mindset, to give you a complete framework and strategy for building out your business, for systematizing how you are living your life and running your professional career, and making sure you're being held accountable to implement fully. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Have me as your direct coach. Work on your game. Dre, all